I can't wait to see how this shakes out. You know, maybe we will find our next... Well, where are we shooting this? Hi everyone, Kyle with Andrew Hilton here to tell you about our upcoming beer tasting for October the 27th at 6 o'clock. Now, we've been really wanting to do a stout tasting as it's been getting colder and colder, and well, when it rains it pours, and all of a sudden everybody's releasing a stout just in time for colder weather. And we're actually doing a full lineup of 4 stouts, all in a slightly different style. Apart from Best of Kin, from which we've done 1 beer before, all of these are brand new arrivals for us. So, from Screaming Toller, this is their Silky Sidestep Stout. Nothing fancy going on with this one. You know, hops, barley, yeast, water, very basic, roasty, rich stout. Next up, this is from Atlas Brewing. This is the Pillars of Hercules Stout. This is their Oatmeal Stout. Now this is a holdover from the 19th century when they started putting oatmeal in a lot of things because it was a perceived health benefit. Next up, from Best of Kin in their white on black Sharpie packaging, we have Sailor's Delight, their Coffee Kelp Stout. Now, coffee stouts are common as anything. Kelp stouts, we've had 1 or 2. I think we've even tasted one. Certainly never had one with coffee in it, never in a lineup of all just stouts. Finally, my pick, the Rye Milk Stout from Hawktail. Now this has been in and out of the store over the last couple of years. I personally really like this beer. It adds the spiciness of the rye and then the slight sweetness of a milk stout. Makes her a really balanced, you know, bold sort of stout. I really like this beer. So that's going to be our lineup. 4 dark beers, all stouts. Something a little different. You know, we're not reaching back into the cabin or the 88 or the annex shelf and picking out something we've done before. No, all new breweries, all new beers. What? It was the same thing when we did that Category 12 profile tasting. We'd never had anything from them. So maybe after this, we'll all really want to try everything from Atlas Brewing. But we won't know till we open the cans. All that and more, Wednesday, October 27th at 6 o'clock. I hope we'll see you out. Media Boutique. Stout tasting. Now we've got 4 different stouts from 4 different breweries for you here. We have one from Screaming Toller, one from Hawktail, one from Atlas, and one from Best of Kin. Now, fun fact, 3 out of the 4 of these are actually brewed off-site. They are contract brews, 2 at Last Spike and 1 at Last Best. The Screaming Toller is brewed at Last Best, and both the Best of Kin and the Atlas are brewed at Last Spike. Now, absolutely no shame in doing contract brewing whatsoever. Cabin quite famously brews most of their super saturation up at Field and Forge, north of Calgary. However, the Hawktail is actually brewed on-site in Rimbey, Alberta, a thing that I have memorized 3 times and still won't stick in my brain. So, Rimbey, Alberta, halfway between Red Deer and Edmonton. So, why are we talking about 4 different stouts? Why not just one? Well, we've got 4 very, very different stouts. We have a classic stout, just to get us started off here. We have a milk and an oatmeal stout, both products of the late 19th century, where they added a wholesome sounding, if not entirely wholesome ingredient, to the beer to make it have perceived health benefits. Milk stout was very often marketed to nursing mothers, and there was this whole oatmeal craze in the late 19th century as like a you'd almost call it like a superfood here. It's just kind of like how acai berries started popping up in every damn thing 10 years ago. It was kind of like that for oatmeal in the late 19th century. It was a superfood, which sounds really dumb now, but so does acai berry, so there you go. And then finally we have a coffee kelp stout. These 2 are relatively recent innovations. First coffee stouts I saw start popping up were in the late 90s. Kelp stouts are fairly recent. We had one by Tofino not too long ago. But I think it's more of a riff on the old oyster stouts, which again come from the city of London and do tend to come from the 19th century. So, Last Best is a relatively tiny place, but I do think they have a fairly large production facility off-site, if I'm not mistaken, because there's no way they're packing in their entire brewery and their entire distillery and their ready-to-drink cocktail side on that little tiny downtown building. There's absolutely no way they can fit all of that, not and a dining room and everything else. William Kellogg swore oatmeal stouts would prevent self-violations. I mean, if you drink enough of it, it'll prevent you from doing anything whatsoever. So, in a sense, he's not wrong. It's really a question of dosage. So, let's jump in here with Screaming Toller. Now, these folks are brewed, as I said, at Last Best at present, but they, I believe, if you go to the website, there was a lot about dogs, like so much about dogs. They're an incredibly dog-friendly brewery, as you might have suggested by, fetching great beer and the picture of a dog on the can. But the other rest of their websites are actually all based around Kananaskis country, as well as the conservation side, not only of the Kananaskis country, but they have just a preservation of all of the Rockies from Alaska down to California. So I assume when they actually get their tap room, when they get everything set up, they'll be in K country. But for now, we've just got the cans. And I haven't had anything else by this brewery, but I gotta say this Oatmeal Stout, it's a leading contender to be my pick of the night already. Did I say Oatmeal Stout? I did, didn't I? This stout, which is clearly not oatmeal, that's the whole point, Kyle, is in fact, my leading candidate so far. It's been a heck of a day. Hi, how are you? Someone who will remain nameless screwed up all the beer orders this week, so it was a rough morning. So, this is exactly what I expect from a stout. Now, I will differentiate all of these stouts from Guinness, which is itself its own separate style, which is called Dry Irish Stout. This comes from the 1790s from the St. James Gate Brewery, which of course is now owned by Diageo. They actually would add a small percentage, 2 to 3% of previously soured beer back into the sweet stout to actually create a very dry, lightly tart, and starting in kind of the 1980s, they'd add the little nitrogen ball to give it a very creamy stout characteristic. Very different style. Not really seen a whole lot outside of Ireland. I know that Big Rock for a few years there had a dry Irish stout. I'll just take a tiny smidge more. And Wild Rose for a very long time had their Alberta Crude, which was a dry Irish stout. Different style than Classic Stout. Classic Stout actually comes from London, and it's a derivative of Classic London Porter. Starting in the mid-1720s, porter became all the rage for a variety of reasons. People liked the kind of dark, roasty characteristic, although it certainly wouldn't have been this dark. This wouldn't come along until the 1800s and the invention of black patent malt. But it didn't sour as fast, it was robust, it was cheap to brew because you didn't have to use a lot of hops. Then, as now, the most expensive ingredient in brewing by a long way is hops. Stouts and porters don't require a lot of hops. So you've got this, easy to brew, doesn't spoil, relatively cheap beer that people love, and they could sell buckets of it. So as a result, just like with IPA, it broke into West Coast IPA, Hazy IPA, Brute IPA, Double and Triple IPA, Session IPA, White IPA, the godforsaken atrocity that is Black IPA. Same thing happened with porters. And they started brewing them all the way down to 2.5%, 3%, like bitters, all the way up to what we now think of as an imperial stout. The term stout simply referred to a higher alcohol stout porter or robust porter, which is a term that still survives to this day. That was the style that they were making. Eventually, the two styles separated, and stout simply became its own style. Oh. Would it still be easy to brew on contract? I would think, because assuming you have your recipe really dialed in, I would say yes, because I think IPAs are on the whole a little more finicky because of what time and exactly what temperature and exactly how much you add your hops, how fresh they are, whether they're pellet or whole cone, or whether you're using something new like cryo. And then on the other side of that, the most finicky, most tricky style of beers to brew are very delicate lagers and pilsners. With a stout, if the contract brewer perhaps makes a tiny error, the beer style will hide it a little better. And again, it's not so dependent on incredibly, incredibly careful brewing. and incredibly careful hopping. I would suggest the kiwi in this because I did notice here too, kiwi hopped. I'm assuming they are using, of course, New Zealand hops. These would be things like Riwaka or Nelson Sauvin. So these hops do have a slightly different characteristic than, say, most of your North American or European hops. They tend to be a little brighter, a little fruitier. The problem with them tends to be they don't have a ton of alpha acid to them, so they occasionally will just come off as being very light and melony and pretty. But they have no staying power, and they tend to fall apart, and they really don't have any they don't have any crunchy bitterness. As if that sounds a lot like a hazy IPA, you're right. New Zealand hops have become a huge craze in hazy IPA, but I've always been kind of hit and miss with them, especially in West Coast IPAs. I think it works very well with this beer, mostly because I like this beer. 19th century air quality, yes, that's absolutely true. Oh, and that's right. Tailgunner was actually doing decoction mashes on contract, but they also were attending every single brew day. Contract brewing is a wide spectrum of different things. It can mean anything from here's some money, brew our beer for us, we'll come pick it up till it's done, right up to we are renting brewing equipment, we are bringing in our ingredients, our brewers, our everything, and we are just renting the equipment. Contract brewing is not a one deal, sort of one style deal, it's many different things. It can be right up from, a home brewer who either comes into money or whatever and wants to realize his vision and works with an established brewer at a contract brewer to make his vision commercially viable, to an established brewing team that just needs more capacity, to 3 people with an idea but no real brewing expertise that really just want some help making a brand. It can be a little bit all over the place. So when I say contract brewing, by no means are all of these going to be done one and the same. I don't have, because again, the websites, brewers' websites, none of them really say if they're actually on site during the brewing process. None of them say they aren't, but yeah, it's certainly not a one size fits all. And Grant, I don't think it's an absolute tragedy. I actually took these out about half an hour ago, so I'm drinking mine on the warmer side, certainly. Stout more so than other styles. I like to have a little bit less chill on it. Does the use of New Zealand hops mean the shelf life of this stout would be questionable? No, because there are other things preserving this. With an IPA, it's not that the beer itself is going to spoil, it's that pretty hoppy characteristic is going to fall off very quickly. With a stout like this, if the hops themselves and the hoppy flavor drops out, you probably won't notice. The beer will change, but it won't necessarily get any worse. In fact, in many cases, especially with imperial stouts that are very aggressively hopped, I actually think the beer gets better after that hop flavor drops out. This has its alcohol. It has the fact that it's a boiled and then canned thing. It's not gonna spoil any more than your, home canned tomato sauce is going to spoil. It's in a sterile environment. When IPAs kind of drop off, it's because that hoppy flavor needs to be so fresh. With this, if the hoppy characteristic drops away, it'll just make the beer taste roastier, slightly sweeter, slightly richer. And as we get into these, the rest of the beers actually do tend to be a little bit sweeter on the whole. So the beer will definitely change as those hops drop away, but I won't say it'll get worse. I really hope Grant does not fall asleep, because otherwise Grant is going to have a very bad morning of scrubbing out frozen stout from inside his freezer. Not that that's ever happened to me. Okay, moving right along. So our next two are late 19th century creations in Milk Stout and Oatmeal Stout. First one coming up from Hawktail. This is a brewery actually that Corey Med from Two Guys Pizza clued me onto. He really likes this brewery. Carries I think 3 or 4 of their beers in his restaurant. I've tasted the whole line. Corey and I are of different minds on the whole of the line. I respect what they're doing. They're just not my style. with the very, very big exception of the rye milk stout. I love rye ales without any exceptions, and a rye milk stout that has that nice spiciness and richness in the rye, and then you're adding a little bit of sweetness and a very soft mouthfeel from it being a milk stout. I love this. This is a fun beer for me. On the nose, you get that immediate lactic hit. You get that sweetness. The reason why we're using lactic here, or lactose, is that traditional beer yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, it struggles to ferment lactose. In fact, it broadly can't. So if you add sugar to this beer, the yeast is just going to say, oh good, more food, and it's just going to convert it into more alcohol and CO2. Whereas if you use lactose, yes, it does add kind of that milky, creamy character, but it also doesn't ferment. So you can actually sweeten the beer and add that kind of creamy characteristic without it turning it into a 11.5% super alcohol bomb. The other way, of course, you can make a beer sweeter is to add enough sugar that the yeast actually starts becoming either less efficient or straight out dying at 11, 12, 13% alcohol, at which point the yeast is dead. It can't ferment, or if it's not dead, it's actually inert because the alcoholic percentage has gotten so high that it can no longer convert sugar into alcohol anymore. And that's why a lot of your really big imperial stouts tend to be incredibly, incredibly sweet. It's just because the yeast can't work in that environment. See, it's funny. Rimbey was the only one of the towns here that I actually had to look up on a map. So yes, well done to Hocktail for trying to do something in Rimbey. I have never been to Rimbey, and I would be absolutely shocked if I ever was. Yeah, I really like this. On the whole, I'm not, the biggest fan of Hocktail across the board, but I love this beer. Like, rye is such a neat ingredient to put in a stout. It adds so much spiciness and richness, and yet you never see it. It's a very unusual grain in a stout. And I think that's a shame because it's so neat. I'm good. Just get in there, Aaron. You know you're going to. I'd like to point out that he finished filling his glass, then necked the rest of the can. What's the rest of the line like? They have a couple of IPAs, neither of which have really done it for me particularly. They have a Mexican style cerveza, which is actually very true to style, but I can't really think of a time when I'd want like a 473 ml tall can of a Mexican style cerveza. I think if I really needed that, I'd just get a Corona, and I would still dislike it, but I'd have it with lime, and if it was a hot day, I'd try to tell myself really hard I was too cool for this and then just drink the hell out of it. I don't know. Their IPAs are fine, but we're spoiled for choice with IPAs in Alberta. Spoiler for our beer tasting coming up, which I just realized I put the cans over there, did not bring them back.
Oh,
we'll get them eventually. Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just the IPAs didn't do it for me, and that kind of soured me on the whole line. Being a giant IPA nerd, I kind of judge a brewery on the quality of its IPAs. That's probably wrong, but oh yeah, Craig, you're going to be ill, but there's only the one. There's only the one with the lactose. You'll be fine. We can all write Craig a letter. Ooh. It's so subtle. Like, I really struggled. I wanted to put this actually at the start initially, but I wanted to open talking about, stouts in general with Silky sidestep. But I think it's actually bigger than the Hocktail, and that's no slight on the Hocktail. Making a slightly lighter stout is absolutely fine. I also noticed it's surprisingly dry. I wonder if they maybe started with like a dry Irish stout as a base recipe and then blended in the rye and then added the lactose. Because that's very light for a stout. And you know what? If you'd asked me that before this tasting, when I actually, in fact, I'll tell you how I set this up. When I initially lined these cans up on the table, I had this at the end because I remember this being a big beer. I'll be honest, if I was doing it purely by weight, I'd probably have it first. It's surprisingly light. And no, I'll get to these questions in order here. Okay, I'm going to leave the splashdown comment alone. What are some of the telltale tasting notes you should be expecting from stouts? The big one is roastiness. You're looking for, so how they get this dark color on the barley is by literally putting it in something that looks very much like a coffee roaster and very slow roasting that grain, or in some cases like with roasted barley, just straight up burning it under a broiler to get this deep, intense caramelization on the outside of the barley grain to the point of actually roasting it all the way through. And that's what produces these, just like with roasted coffee or really roasted anything else, you get these dark, rich, lightly smoky characteristics. Beyond that, you'll get other things that tend to be associated with that roasty flavor. You'll get coffee, you'll get chicory, you'll get smoke. A lot of people will get chocolate. And you start to see that where people say, well, I like the chocolatey notes of a stout. Let's do a chocolate stout. We see a lot of chocolate stouts. Hey, I really like the coffee aspects of a stout. They'll add coffee. Some people get vanilla, depending on exactly how they've roasted the barley. You can get vanilla. And again, we've seen vanilla stouts, we've seen chili pepper stouts. If you take your stout and age it in a barrel, then you'll start getting whiskey notes, you'll get vanilla notes, you'll get coconut notes from the cask itself. But it really does all start out. You shouldn't be seeing hoppy notes, or at least if they're there, they shouldn't be distracting. Again, this is my big axe to grind with IPA is, hey, you took a wonderful thing in IPA, you took a wonderful thing in stout, and then you mixed together and ruined it. This is just so delicate and rich, and it has so many different layers going on. With this, I can tell the sweetness of the milk. I do get that kind of milky, creamy mouthfeel. I get the spice from the rye. I get all of that together. But the big core flavors are kind of roast, coffee, chocolate, chicory, maybe smoke, and then they accent it with oatmeal or rye or coffee or kelp, and they build it up from there. From Eric, adding lactose doesn't usually result in something so delicate, does it? Yes and no. I've had some very, very delicate milk stouts. I'd say Bell's Special Double Cream, which is out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I think is actually the best lactic stout or milk stout in the world. I think that's a very, very delicate beer. But you're right on the whole. A lot of the milk stouts that we have, especially here in Alberta, they tend to really lean into the sugar and they make much more of a sweet stout. Blackbridge, I think, is very big on this. And again, a lot of your dessert stouts, which these are things like the Vancouver Island, Nanaimo Bar Porter, and 88 did like a very sweet stout. Was it a s'more stout or something last year? Yeah, that sounds about right. Most dessert stouts, which I actually consider a slightly separate and distinct category, those tend to be milk stouts on the whole, just because the milk sugar does make a dessert stout, that sweetness and desserty character, easy to pull off. So no, a very restrained, delicate, dry style like this in a milk stout is quite unusual, which is I think part of why I like this beer so much. And yeah, Grant, so all the lactose sugar isn't consumed or broken down by the time of enjoyment? No, purely because the lactic sugar is not consumable by the yeast. So also, we were all laughing and looking at Sky trying to sneak just behind the camera there. He had about like 11 inches to get through, and he managed it. He did it.
I did it the second time.
Oh yes, all the things is also a sweet stout. We're not going to bring that up tonight.
Well, on that note, the first thing that I got off of this was banana.
You got banana first?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was
Nose or taste?
like immediate taste. I didn't get it on the nose at all. And then it kind of disappeared. I lost it. I don't know where it went. I tried to taste it again and I couldn't get it. So it might have been just the transition from 1 to 2 or something.
Hey,
but
you know what? That's totally fair. If you're picking up banana, there might be some banana there.
it was quick.
I
Yep.
got coffee for sure.
Yeah, coffee for sure. Yeah. Question here, like coffee, all grains have to be roasted to be brewed. This is the thing that I talked about quite extensively whenever I talk about classic German lagers like Helles or German Pils or Czech Pils or Vienna lagers or Marzens. All barley up until kind of the early 18th century early 18th century, was basically roasted over a smoky, oaky fire. It roasted the barley quite dark. It tended to pick up smoky notes. Virtually everything, no matter how delicate they tried to be with it, it was going to end up fairly dark in color. It was going to end up fairly smoky. Coke firing, or very clean burning coal in a kiln firing, basically using indirect heat in a sealed container, which gave us those pale barleys like Pilsners, like Vienna lagers, like Marzen's. That was a relatively recent, in brewing history anyway, innovation. So yes, all malt has to be malted, which is to say gotten wet, allowed to sprout so that the plant itself or the seed itself actually converts its complex starches into simple sugars to help fermentation. Then you need to stop it from, turning into a barley plant. So you use heat to kill it. That step, the kilning of the malt, used to be exclusively roasting, now can also be dry heat kilning, which produces a pale malt. So yes, but no. And Eric also has banana, as does Tyler. So you're not wrong, Aaron.
Crazy.
I never doubted you.
Thank you. Can you take a very brief intermission and talk about your car?
No, I'm not taking a brief intermission. So we're going to move on. No, I'm not taking an intermission for that. Jesus, Aaron.
Just to talk about your car.
No, I'm not talking about that. No, we're fine. Move on. Move on, Aaron. Very excited. All right, so let's move on. Atlas Brewing, Pillars of Hercules. This is a oatmeal stout. Now, just like milk stouts, oatmeal stouts, they started out during that health craze. I really like oatmeal stouts, and they actually very nearly died out. Milk stouts kind of carried on a little while because there was always a market for a sweeter stout. But at a certain point, like oatmeal stouts would be marketed as oatmeal stout. And they'd only contain like 0.5% to 1% oatmeal or oats in the actual blend. And at a certain point, if anyone's familiar with the Simpsons episode where Homer visits the Duff Brewery, and they have one pipe that's going into like Duff Premium, and Duff Light, and it's all the same beer. They were literally doing that at one particular brewery in the UK. Their stout and their oatmeal stout were literally the same beer, just in different bottles. Oatmeal Stout was actually revived by Samuel Smith, which is owned by Marzen de Vin. And it was actually by a request by, I believe, one of the original founders of Camera, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, they'd heard all about this, London oatmeal stout, and they wanted it revived and wanted to taste one. So they actually paid Samuel Smith to brew an oatmeal stout, basically either from historical records or completely from scratch. I've heard differing stories on this. Basically, Samuel Smith, in 1 or 2 batches, recreated oatmeal stout as a style, and every oatmeal stout out there, from the Atlas to Saint Ambroise to any of the others that you've had, they're all based on Samuel Smith's beer that some dude paid them to brew for them to recreate or rediscover this old English style. So oatmeal stout is, yes, a very ancient recipe, but just like IPA, it kind of died out and then was reinvented decades or centuries later in a completely new form. So does Samuel Smith's oatmeal stout and all of the beers that followed after taste anything like old oatmeal stout? We have no idea, but I'm really glad oatmeal stout's still around because it's very, very good. I think I speak for everyone when I say what you want to hear. Yes, I did get a car. Yes.
See?
I did get a new car. I finally got one. I special ordered a car out of the UK. I got the Mini Cooper Clubman John Cooper Works, so it's the super, super hot hatch. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. It's dumb fast, it's incredibly comfortable. I've never ever bought a new car before. I've certainly never factory ordered a car before. And I gotta say, like, sitting there in a dealership and like picking out like carpet swatches and like leathers and paint chips and everything, it was kind of wild. I ordered it exactly 5 months ago today, and it just arrived. So I'm I'm really happy. If you want to see it, it's parked out back. It'll always be parked out back. So
Hey, there we go. Nice. Brief intermission.
brief intermission. There you go. Have we had a Marzen? Unless we did a Marzen or an Oktoberfest, because they're the same thing, for like an Oktoberfest tasting last year, and I think we might have. If you've had a Vienna lager, you've had a Marzen. They're, to my palate at least, completely indistinguishable. The only difference would be that Vienna lager maybe has a little bit more perceptible hop profile, which is to say any at all. Marzen just tends to be low alcohol, golden amber chugging juice. It's very easy drinking. It's the reason they serve it in giant 1 liter steins for Oktoberfest. It's easy to put down, yeah. Coke float, eh?
Yeah. Totally.
I can see Coke float.
Yeah, definitely.
So Atlas Brewing, these guys will ultimately be out of Airdrie. Right now they're brewing out of Last Spike. The brewery is under construction. Also, Pillars of Hercules, I kind of like their whole aesthetic of like, this, very Hellenic myths and Hellenic themed breweries. I'm very excited for this. So I love the packaging, love the idea, love the name. I can't wait to see what else they come up with. And this is a really strong stout. Like, I like how rich this is. I like that it's got a little bit of sweetness to it. Alcohol is 6.3, which isn't anywhere crazy, but like it definitely has some body and some richness to it. Yes, some mouthfeel. But that higher alcohol does give it that richness as a body that, a lighter stout maybe won't have. What's the alcohol in this? I'm curious. Is this a little lower? 5 flat versus 6.1. I wonder if the reason this maybe tastes a little lighter is that lack of alcohol. Maybe it's just these are bigger beers because they have more booze. I don't know. I've never been to Airdrie, so I don't know the answer to your question, Eric. And yes, Kevin, we knew you'd be into the ancient brand of beers, obviously. Salted licorice candy works. That richness, that weight. Oh, I'm really on board with this Atlas. This is really good. It's I know I say this every week, but fun lineup. I like this lineup.
Fun.
And this was literally for me, and okay, this was, other than this, just picking names out of a hat. I wanted breweries I'd never shown on the channel before. I wanted breweries that like had a cool new stout that maybe followed a theme. I wanted Oatmeal Stout for sure. The Silky Sidestep actually sounded really good. Their website was actually very well done. They had tasting notes for their beers. What a revelation. And I wanted to revisit Best of Kin purely because their Big Hat IPA, I may or may not have said tasted exactly like Rickard's White and kind of made fun of. I wanted to give them another chance because I don't think I was unfair in the sense that their beer did taste like Rickard's White and wasn't very good. But I did want to give them another chance to actually try something else by them, because tasting one beer in a lineup, and maybe it's against some breweries that are better established like Annex or Cabin, that's not really fair. So I brought it in here. I'm pretty sure it's the only returning brewery to our channel. I wanted to give it another shot. So we'll see how it goes. If it finishes dead last again, we will never have them back, but you know what? We're gonna give it another run out. You get pickles. That's interesting, Craig. And Eric's getting cheap, like penny candy cola bottles. Okay. I can see the candy note. I really can. And maybe I would like a touch more roast to this. But I'm guessing this is probably 30-35% oats. And when you're only using 65 to 70% roasted barley, you're going to end up with maybe a little less roast and a little more sweetness than other things. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we've got coming up next week. And this is our Hype IPA tasting.
Stoke.
It's going to be pretty good. So obviously, the reason for it is oscillation. Yes, we are We probably could sell, definitely could sell all of this retail, but I'm not going to. I'm going to taste Oscillation with you folks on the channel because I want to. For anyone not familiar, this is the new Superflux / Establishment collaboration. And yeah, that if you're not sold just by me saying those words, then I think you're just lost to us. Brand new Imperial IPA, New England style, by probably 2 of the 3 most hyped breweries I can think of. Even at Establishment, their phone's ringing off the hook about this beer. I did get a chance to try it yesterday after I drove down from Calgary. It's incredible. So we're gonna do that. Eric did mention Stratosphere. Stratosphere is very, very good. This is the double IPA from Cabin. If you remember last year, they did Seasons Past, which was their standard West Coast IPA. This is a double IPA. Cabin, I don't think, can make bad IPAs. Triple Threat's not great. But otherwise, I don't think you can make bad IPAs. Really like this. This will be fun. Returning from 88 is Power Wheels. It's now in their Jacket series. This is their Mosaic IPA. This was in their one-off, like, limited release IPA sleeves the first time we got it. It's now in the Jacket series, so more available. So available enough we can actually do it. So that's really fun. And then something brand new. Just like Superflux is super allocated, super hard to get, you have to request it, so is Haifa Project, and this is their New Normal IPA, or the New Normal IPA. These guys are out of Vancouver, really heavily hyped, really exciting. Didn't necessarily have the same level of like immediate appeal and interest that Superflux did. Your light died, Aaron. But still, like really, really limited, really cool. I just want to have like all these super limited one-off IPAs head to head and see what shakes out. Because I mean, if we're going to do a Highlander tasting for IPAs, these are kind of the hottest ones on the market right now. So why not just go for broke and try them all? So, moving on. I like the molasses. I like this beer. I'm not really, I can see the gummy candy thing, but to me it doesn't distract from the beer. I'm gonna split with the audience on this one and actually say I like this, like quite a bit.
Whoop. That was the wrong button.
What did you do?
Record that timestamp. That's perfect B-roll fodder.
All right, so best of kin. This is your second and final shot to impress me. This is your Sailor's Delight Coffee Kelp Stout. Now I do love a coffee stout. That's certainly true. I enjoyed the Tofino Kelp Stout, well, actually quite a bit, as I recall. Is there an upcoming wine tasting to look forward to? Well, November 12th, well, I'm gone this weekend is the problem. November 12th is our whiskey tasting. And then with a couple of other things, me being gone, I'm taking Wednesday the 10th off. A couple other little things. I don't have a wine tasting booked yet, but I will have before December 1st. We will be doing another wine tasting in November after the 12th. I don't know if we'll have it ready by the 19th. But it will be one more before the start of December. I don't have anything booked yet, which means it's a good time to put in requests. We certainly get the kelp. I get kind of that green, salty, seaweedy thing like crazy. The coffee is there, but actually because of the kelp, it's kind of coming off like unroasted coffee. Ooh. All right, best of kin, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. That's pretty darn good, actually. I like the savory note from the kelp. The coffee comes through, although I'm not sure it's really accented well by the kelp. I think it kind of shines on its own better. I think the kelp maybe muddies the water with the coffee, but you know what? That's all right. I'll take that. It's certainly better than their IPA. Craig, you got it. We'll book you a whiskey tasting, no problem. We are actually doing a 6 whiskey tasting for the first time in a while, so that'll be fun.
6 whiskey.
Do either of you have any more best of kin experience, Aaron, Sky?
Other than the?
Other than the 2 we've had? No?
Nothing.
Eric really likes the graphic design on the cans.
I do too.
Yeah, I think they look sharp.
You said Sharpie in the promo.
Well, I mean, it kind of looks like they were drawn with a Sharpie. Yeah. Also, shut up, Aaron. Yeah, I agree, Craig. Like, that's pretty all right. I like the saltiness. The only thing I would say is I'm not sure the kelp and the coffee play well together, but they're both such nice flavors on their own that I'm willing to forgive it that. Don for 2 sets of whiskey tasting. I will say to both of you, by the way, I don't always go back and check all the comments, so do either send us an email or a call tomorrow to book them in, because we haven't even started making them yet, and tomorrow is going to be a busy, busy day, I have a feeling. Because it's Devin's week off, so we're all working double shifts to cover for Devin.
Now this is okay, but I think we blew it on the order.
You think we blew it on the order?
Yeah.
Where would you have put this? Ahead of the
Atlas? Oh man, like way ahead somewhere.
You think this is lighter?
I think it's getting buried. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll grant you ahead of the Atlas. Like,
yeah.
I think that's fair. I don't think it's bigger than. It's definitely maybe second. Because the Silky sidestep, you're right, might even be bigger than this. But that really messes with my old history lesson thing I had going on. So.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a fair assumption to put it last, but I think in this, for me anyway, this is a number one. Not like a number one in.
I think it's still light. I think it's still lighter than the Hawktail, but I'd have it a solid 2. But I'm with you that it could have been earlier.
You got it buried. But
And yeah, I'm with Eric and with Megan here. Like, it definitely could have gone earlier. I think there is a lot going on here, but it's not perhaps the most appropriate order. I would also say that I'm having them a fair bit warmer than I would expect a lot of you.
Yeah.
I think it's showing maybe a little bit better. If this was a little colder, it might be very muted. Because mine now at this point is, it's not quite room temperature, but it's certainly not fridge cold, because it's been out for, all of an hour now.
2, 4, 3.
1, 2, 4, 3. Fair enough. 1 or 2, then 3 or 4. I think I'm going to give it to the Screaming Toller myself. I really like that. Like, for it being the basic no oatmeal, no milk, no kelp, no coffee stout. Bloody well done, Screaming Toller. I think we'll have more of your beer, not only in the store, because they're going to have a shelf spot for this after this, because that rocks, but also just in general. I want to try the rest of the lineup. That's fantastic.
Definitely the best.
Ooh, Grant's question. Thank you for pointing that out, Eric. I was almost about to wrap up. I mean, we're getting absolutely nailed in terms of price increases across the board. We haven't raised our price yet on the Dalmore 15, but like, we just got a $20 a bottle price increase on that, which has nothing to do with barley prices, because it's reflective of barley prices 15 years ago. And we went through the aluminum shortage and only saw like a 2 or 3% increase across the board in pricing. And as a raw cost for breweries, barley isn't the biggest cost. Usually it's the power or the gas, the oil, whatever you're using to actually heat your boilers is one of them, as is hops. Barley, while it's a significant cost, isn't one of the highest ones, but between spiking energy costs and spiking barley costs, I think we could see a price increase. I can't see it being ludicrous, but I could see, especially breweries that can afford to, because they have really comfortable baked-in sales, taking up their 4-pack price 50 cents to $1. I think some breweries that are struggling, perhaps, will keep their prices the same out of fear of softening their market share, but I could see seeing, at least on the breweries that you buy most often, which is because the breweries that are succeeding, I think we could see some price increases. I'm not going to say that there's going to be an across-the-board price increase, because certain breweries are just married to a certain price. I know Wild Rose is just married to their pricing structure and does not want to go up. They see where they are in the market. They don't want to go any higher. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, there's definitely, especially energy prices, like breweries are running heating and cooling 24/7, running boilers, running cooling jackets and heating jackets for their fermenting tanks, washing bottles, boiling water for sparging, everything. The energy costs on a brewery are absolutely enormous. I mean, yes, they go through literal tons of barley a week, but at the same time, barley as a consumable good is reasonably cheap. I mean, you listen to like the ag report and it's like, how much is barley per ton? And it's like a laughable amount of money, like just laughably small. But yeah, when that price doubles, you know, even if it's only, you know, $65 a ton instead of 35, it's still, you know, significant. Okay. One's the fave, 3124. Seeing a lot of 1 at the top. That's fun. And yeah, Eric does not like 1. Fine, Eric. All right, I think we'll wrap her up there, folks. We will see you Wednesday next week for our Hype IPA tasting, and on the 12th for Scotch tasting. So thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful night.